Hi guys. So it's Sherry here today on Sherry Makes Stuff, and today we are going to be working just you and me together. I'm going to be talking with my hands largely, and you're going to be watching me work on my sewing machine. Um, Reggie's off and he's editing a video for us, so that just leaves you and me together alone in the studio. So we will get things started. And I thought this is one of the questions that I get asked a lot, or one of the problems I think that new sewers come up with a lot is, how do I keep my fabrics from raveling? How do I keep my seams from falling apart? So a lot of you are patrons at maybe a Renaissance festival, or you do a lot of cosplaying or something like that. And so your fabrics really need to hold up, and your clothing really needs to be able to last kind of all day and not fall apart on you, or for long periods of time, maybe even in all kinds of weather, and not fall apart on you. And some of the fabrics that we use, while they're beautiful, they tend to fray a lot. And so how do we keep that from happening? How do we take care of our fabrics and sew them together and make a product that will last a long time, that will be durable, beautiful, and not give us any trouble, or at least minimize the trouble? We're never going to completely get away from that. Seams come apart, fabrics fray, holes happen, these kinds of things happen, but maybe we can minimize these things and kind of mitigate the issues that we have. So I'm going to show you 6 of my favorite finishes today. Well, sort of 7, but only 6 I'm going to show you, because I'm going to show you on my sewing machine. This is assuming that you don't have a serger. So a serger or an overlock machine does a stitch like this, right? So this is this is kind of a old one that I did a while ago. And you can see it's kind of been picked apart a little bit, but this is an overlock machine. This is a 4-thread overlock machine. And what this does is, it literally, the threads come up and over the edge, and so it locks everything together, so your seams aren't going to fall apart, because your edge literally cannot fray. So this is the best way to go. It creates this nice flat kind of product. You see how these two fabrics are really melded together as one. It creates a nice finished edge that you don't have to worry about. The problem is, not everybody has a serger, and if you don't do a lot of sewing, there's really no purpose in you buying a serger. A serger can do a lot of things other than just finishing your edge. But if you don't do a lot of sewing, honestly, it's a purchase that you really don't need to do. So I would recommend getting a serger if you plan on doing a lot of sewing. But if you're just going to sew a few things here or there, honestly, it's a purchase that you don't need to do. So let's cover, what do we do if we don't have a serger? Oh, I'm going to regret that later, aren't I? Oh well, let's move on. So, the first one I'm going to show you is binding. So this is a lot of the fabrics that we use, or a similar type of fabric. I've tried to pick fabrics that are pretty common for Renaissance festivals or for cosplay kind of stuff. I haven't worked with any knits in this demo. If you want to see something with knits, let me know in the comments below, and I can do that at another time. But this is largely going to be working with cottons, various weaves and various weights, and it's going to be working with a little bit of some slippery silk. So we'll look at that at the end. That'll be the trickiest one. And then a couple of nice mid-weight upholstery fabrics. This one's a little bit on the slippery side. I have one that's got this cottonish backing fabric on it, so this one's a little bit firmer. And then a couple of kind of mid-weight cottons. So we'll go through these one at a time. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is bias tape. Now, there are a couple of different kinds of bias tape out there. You can get extra wide or wide double fold bias tape, or single fold bias tape. I don't tend to buy a lot of single fold bias tape, but I do have some on hand here that I probably picked up at an estate sale or something somewhere. Bias tape is something I don't buy this new a lot because I tend to pick it up at estate sales, thrift stores, stuff like that, where somebody destashed, and I will pick it up and restash. So I always have a bunch of this stuff laying around. Sometimes I'll have to buy new if I need to finish some out for a particular product, but I'll always have like weirdo, rando colors like this just kind of, sitting around. And I'll have things like this single fold. So it's a single fold in that it is only folded one time. We have these two edges folded over. Double fold bias tape has that fold over, and then it is also folded in the center. So it is folded in two different ways. Does that make sense? That's what makes a double fold. I never got that when I was younger. It took me a long time to figure that out. So if a single fold is only folded one way, it's folded twice, but it's only folded one way. So it's got the two ends folded down towards the center. Double fold bias tape is folded towards the center and then folded in the middle. And double fold bias tape also, let me get this a little closer, see if we'll focus. Focus. Are we focused? There we go. So if you look, one side of the bias tape is a little bit, it's like not exactly in the middle, if that makes sense. So one end is going to be a little shorter than the other. All right. And so I will refer to this as now we're sewing the short end. And that's what I mean. That's the end that's not sticking up. And then the long end, right, is the edge that's kind of sticking out a little bit longer. All right. So hopefully that makes sense. So what does bias tape mean? So fabric is made on a loom, and you have warp and weft threads. Let me angle this down a little bit more. And your warp threads are running away from you, the weaver. Wow, this is hard to do. Like, props to all the YouTubers I watch that like draw while they're have their camera in front of them. So these would be the warp threads. Like I'm the weaver and these are the warp threads. These are what are on the loom itself. All right. So this is a very bad representation of the loom structure, right? These are the warp threads. The weft threads are what go back and forth. So this is what the weaver weaves back and forth to create the fabric, right? These are the weft threads. So warp and weft are the terms that we're using. Now, if you are going in the direction of the warp threads, that is the grain of the fabric. On commercial patterns, you will see that as an arrow, right? So that is telling you you want your pattern to be lined up, or that arrow on the pattern to be lined up with the grain of the fabric. Going along with the weft threads, that is the cross grain. Going on a 90-degree angle, or I'm sorry, going on a 45-degree angle to these warp and weft threads, that is the bias. Now, what's important about knowing this? Well, I'll tell you. So I will use our blue fabric here. This is a plain weave fabric. Maybe you can kind of see the weave. See if I can get that in focus a little better. So this is a plain weave fabric, just a cotton broadcloth, and it has just warp and weft threads. So this is the grain of the fabric. Angle that down just a little bit more for you. So this is the grain of the fabric going this way. And if you were to pull on it with both of your hands along the grain of the fabric, there's really no stretch. It's very firm. If you were to pull on the cross grain, that's also pretty firm. Some fabrics will have a little bit of stretch this way. This one doesn't really have any. So the cross grain is pretty firm. But if you were to pull on the bias has actually quite a bit of stretch. I don't know if you can see that or not, but that has a lot of stretch to it. And this is how you can get fabric that's essentially a two-dimensional form to fit around a three-dimensional object, which is our bodies, is by understanding the difference between the grain, the cross grain, the bias, and how they all work together. So it's a very simple principle, right? And so this, and maybe we can, again, pull it up to where we can see it. Focus. Thank you. See how you can see the grain of the fabric and how it's at a 45-degree angle? And so this has a little bit of stretch to it. And also you can steam this and it will fit around curves. So it will curve, where a straight grain fabric will buckle if you try to curve it. See how it does not want to curve at all. You're getting these pleats in there. But this, because it's on the bias, this will curve and it won't give us those tight kind of folds. And we can steam this and press it and get it to conform to a very soft natural curve. So it's a very useful item for working around seams, working around curves, and because it's on the bias, it's not going to fray. So that's another bonus behind using bias tape, is it's not going to fray. See these edges? Even though they're just raw cut edges, I'll bring it in a little closer again so you can see. Those are just raw cut edges. And it's essentially kind of like a broadcloth-y like fabric, like it's a lightweight cotton fabric, but it's not going to fray because this is on the bias. So the threads can't pull out because we are, 45-degree angle to the weave of the fabric. So it's a very stable kind of fabric, a very stable kind of thing for us to use as an edge finish. Okay, so I've cut one piece of bias tape. I need to cut another piece. If it's just a short piece like this that I'm working on, I'll probably cut the piece and get it prepped and ready to go. If it's a longer piece, then I very well may just work off of the kind of card and just keep spooling it off of here until it's gone. But this is a short piece and I don't want this thing in my way, so I'm just going to cut the piece off and we will get that out of our way. So now we have our bias strips cut. We can move over to our sewing machine and we can start doing some sewing. Okay, so I want to take a moment and talk about the bed of my sewing machine and what these different measurements mean. A lot of sewing machines have similar measurements. If yours does not, a typical thing that people will do is they will run a piece of tape down in the various measurements that they use most often. And what this is used for is so that you can line the edge of your fabric up and get a nice straight even seam with an even measurement all the way across. So my sewing machine is laid out in 1/8 inch measurements, and that is from the needle position. So the needle to about the edge of the presser foot is about 1/4 of an inch, give or take a little bit. My needle is actually a little bit off center, but it's pretty close. So it's about 1/4 of an inch. And then to here, this is 3/8 of an inch, 4/8, which of course is a 1/2 an inch, 5/8 and 6/8 out. Typical for garment construction, typical for garment construction, a typical seam allowance should be either 4/8 or 5/8, or a 1/2 inch or 5/8 of an inch in width. And if that might seem like a lot of fabric, you'll understand why as we go through these different seam finishing and seam edging things. Okay, so now that we've gone over this different measurement system and what this means, we will see what that looks like when we have a piece of fabric in play. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sew my seam. So again, this is the seam binding way to kind of edge finish this material. So I'm going to pull my presser foot up, pull my needle into the all the way up position, kind of detangle my threads here. I put my needle down so I could check my measurements for you and make sure my machine was on point, and it pretty much is. Okay, so I'm going to line my fabric up with, I usually go with a 1/2 an inch, but just for the sake of argument, I'm going to go with a 5/8 inch. Most commercial sewing patterns, that is what they are set up for, is a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to set it up with that. I always start with the needle in the needle down position. And now for a little ASMR as I run through the seam. As you're sewing, by the way, you don't want to push your fabric through the sewing machine because you can create all kinds of problems. Really, all your hands are here for is to kind of guide the fabric through, make sure it stays straight, doesn't go all wonky and all over the place. But you really want to let the machine do the majority of the work. Okay, and to kind of lock in the seam, take a couple of stitches back and forth, and then pull it out. Oops, sorry about that. Pull it out, trim, and now we have our seam sewn. Very nice. Let's zoom this out just a little bit so you can see better everything that I'm doing. Okay, so now we have our seam. Now what do we do? So now I take my binding and I'm going to start and I'm going to sew down the shorter edge first. So I'm going to take, again, remember this edge in the back. Get it in focus. So this edge in the back again was a little longer and this edge in the front was a little shorter. And so I'm going to take this front edge and this is what I'm going to sew down to the fabric first. So what I want to end up doing is I want to sew this down. The end product is that I'm going to sew this down so that it is covering up my seam. So it will be covering up my seam like this all the way down. So let's do that, shall we? Now it's very important to always iron your seams. You'll see me ironing seams as we go along. You want to always iron your seam flat, and then you want to iron it open. So we're going to do that. I'm going to go do that. I'm going to take this over to the ironing board, and I will be right back. So when you see this again, it will be ironed nice and flat. So my fabric is now ironed nice and flat. It's really beautifully done. Can you guys see though how like this fabric is fraying like crazy? Like it's really beautiful, but man, does this stuff fray. Like this would fall apart on you. You know what I mean? Like in a day or so, you wouldn't be able to wear this garment, whatever I was making. You wouldn't be able to wear this very long without this just coming right apart on you. So you would have to do some kind of edge finish on this. This is actually fabric that I used for a courtesan Italian gown that I made for myself last year. And yeah, I think I serged all of the seams because it was kind of a hot mess otherwise. Okay, so let's find that short edge and we are going to sew that down to our seam allowance. So again, I'm matching up the raw edges, my seam allowance, to my little bias tape here. And I'm going to stitch this down. You do want to make sure that you're not sewing, because I'm going to sew in this little groove here. You want to make sure that you're not sewing through the rest of this fabric. So I have everything else folded over here to the left, and I am just going to make sure that I'm sewing only on this one, on the seam allowance, on the one seam allowance. So again, this is why using the shorter edge is a little bit easier. So get this in place. Start with your needle in the needle down position. Sorry, I adjust my seat a lot, so if you get those chair farty noises a lot, that's why. All right, and I'm kind of feeling to make sure that I'm not catching that top layer. And I'm just sewing. This is called, again, stitching in the ditch. So I'm getting in this fold here. Trying to keep it as straight as possible. And this is a little bit of a Julia Child moment. Like if you get a little bit off, This is going to be inside your garment. Who's going to see it? As long as it's functional. And this, by the way, is a couture garment finish that I'm teaching you here. Just going to snip off the extra. This is a couture finishing. This is often called colloquially kind of a Hong Kong seam. So now I have this sewn down, and I am going to flip this over. I think I'm going to zoom out for the other side so you can see a little more clearly kind of a global what I'm doing here. I don't know if you're picking up everything that I'm doing. I'm trying to watch my camera and sew at the same time. So now I'm going to, so I've flipped it over. I'm still just working on the one side, right? Here's the other seam allowance. Still just working on the one side. I have flipped it over. And now I'm going to sew this down. And you could do this either in a zigzag or in a straight stitch. I typically do a straight stitch. My needle, I can move the needle position. So I'm going to move the needle position to the left as far as it will go. Start in the needle down position. Actually, I want to move that over just a little bit. I want to be a little closer to the edge. You really want to get as close to the edge as possible. I really should hand finish this. But again, this is going to be on the inside of the garment. Nobody's going to see it. And the purpose is for this to be a strong garment hold. And so I feel like, or a strong garment finish. And I feel like sewing by machine is not only faster, but it's also more secure. So I'm going to do this by machine. That's just kind of what I do. If you want to do it by hand, you go right on ahead. I support you and your life choices. And there's one side. And so you can see now how that really controls that edge. Look at how beautiful that looks, right? All right, and I'm going to do the other side. I'm going to go through it kind of quickly since I went through the first one pretty slow. So that is our edging. Look at that. See how nice that looks? And that is not going to fray. That is never going to come apart. So you're going to have, right, this garment. It looks great on the outside. And then on the inside, it looks nice as well. So that is edge finishing it. That's a bias finish, right? It is a little bulky. So again, medium weight or heavier weight fabrics can take this, but be aware that this is kind of a bulky edge finish, so it's not going to be perfect for everything. All right, let's move on to the next one, shall we? I'm going to be talking largely with my hands today. See those mad skills? It's not at all double arc. Let me try and reshoot that without getting my big hand in the way.